I still remember the exact moment my life split into before and after. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of night when Chicago's wind cuts through your coat like a knife. I was driving back from a late meeting with a client, my headlights cutting through the fog rolling off Lake Michigan. The streets were unusually empty for that hour, which should have been my first warning sign. My name is Harper Delaney, though back then I was Harper Marchetti. At 32, I'd built a career as one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the city. On paper, my life looked perfect. I had the corner office, the designer wardrobe, the lakefront penthouse, and a husband who commanded respect wherever he went. What the society pages didn't mention was that my husband, Dante Marchetti, didn't earn that respect through legitimate business dealings. For 8 years, I'd been married to one of the most powerful mafia bosses in Chicago. I knew what he was when I married him. I was 24, fresh out of law school, and foolishly believed that love could exist separately from business. Dante had swept me off my feet with his intensity, his protection, his unwavering confidence. He made me feel like the center of his universe. For a while, maybe I was. That October night, I was reviewing case notes in my mind when I noticed the black SUV in my rearview mirror. It had been following me for the last 6 blocks, maintaining the same distance, making the same turns. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'd been around Dante's world long enough to recognize a tail when I saw one. I reached for my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart was pounding now, and I could see the SUV accelerating behind me. 4 rings, 5. The vehicle behind me was getting closer, and I could see 2 more approaching from side streets ahead. "Come on, Dante, pick up," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Someone was making a move, and I was the target. Whether it was a rival family trying to get leverage over Dante or someone within his own organization, I didn't know. What I did know was that I was trapped. 6 rings. 7. My phone went to voicemail. I tried again immediately, my breath coming faster now. The SUVs were boxing me in, forcing me toward the industrial district where the streetlights were sparse and witnesses were non-existent. I called again, and again. Each time, it rang and rang before going to voicemail. Where the hell was he? Dante always answered my calls. Always. It was one of his rules. He'd told me from the beginning that if I ever called, no matter what, he would answer. It was his promise that I would always be safe, always be protected. That promise was the foundation of our entire relationship, the thing that made living in his dangerous world bearable. I was dialing for the 5th time when they made their move. The SUV behind me rammed into my rear bumper, sending my car fishtailing across the slick pavement. I dropped my phone, gripping the wheel with both hands as I fought to maintain control. My legal mind, trained to stay calm under pressure, kicked into overdrive. I needed to get to a public place, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. But they'd planned this well. They forced me down a service road that dead-ended at an abandoned warehouse. My car skidded to a stop, and within seconds, I was surrounded. 4 men emerged from the vehicles, their faces obscured by the darkness and their raised collars. I could see the outline of weapons under their coats. My phone had fallen into the footwell. I scrambled to reach it, my fingers finally closing around it as I heard footsteps approaching my car. With shaking hands, I dialed Dante one more time. The phone rang against my ear as someone tried the driver's door handle. Locked, thank God. But that wouldn't stop them for long. "Please," I breathed into the phone, not even caring that I was leaving this message on his voicemail. "Dante, I need you. I'm by the old Riverside warehouse district. There are men here, and I don't know what they want, but I'm scared. Please, if you get this, I need help now." A window shattered. Glass rained down on me, and rough hands reached in to unlock the door. I screamed, fighting against the grip that pulled me from my car. My phone clattered to the ground, still connected to Dante's voicemail, recording everything. "Mrs. Marchetti," one of them said, his voice cold and professional. "You're coming with us." "Who sent you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady, even as terror coursed through my veins. "What do you want?" They didn't answer. Instead, they started dragging me toward one of the SUVs. I fought, using every self-defense move I'd learned, but there were too many of them. My mind was racing through possibilities. Was this the Calabrese family, finally making good on their threats after Dante had muscled in on their territory? Or the Russians, who'd been circling Chicago's waterfront operations like sharks? Just as they were forcing me into the vehicle, sirens pierced the night air. Someone had called the police, probably hearing my screams echo through the empty industrial area. My attackers cursed, released me roughly, and scattered to their vehicles. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving me collapsed on the wet pavement, my designer suit ruined, my body shaking with adrenaline and shock. The police found me there, and I gave them a statement that revealed nothing useful. I couldn't tell them the truth about who my husband was, or why someone might want to kidnap me. Instead, I claimed it was a random carjacking, that I'd scared them off by fighting back. The officers seemed skeptical but had no evidence to contradict my story. They drove me home, and I sat in the back of that patrol car, staring at my cracked phone screen, seeing the call log that showed 6 attempts to reach my husband. 6 calls during the worst moment of my life, and he hadn't answered a single one. When I finally walked into our penthouse at 2 a.m, Dante was there, pacing the living room, his phone in his hand. He rushed to me the moment the door opened, his face a mask of concern that might have fooled me if I hadn't already seen the cracks in his facade. "Harper, thank God. I just got your messages. What happened? Are you hurt?" His hands were on my shoulders, his dark eyes scanning me for injuries. I looked up at him. This man I'd loved for 8 years, this man who'd promised to always protect me, and I asked the only question that mattered. "Where were you, Dante? I called you 6 times. Why didn't you answer?" Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? Whatever it was there and gone in an instant, replaced by his usual mask of control. I was in a meeting. My phone was on silent. "I'm sorry, baby, I'm so sorry. Tell me what happened." But I barely heard his explanation. Because in that moment, as he pulled me into his arms and held me tight, I smelled it. A perfume that wasn't mine. Sweet and floral, clinging to his shirt collar. And I saw it. A smudge of lipstick on his neck, partially wiped away but still visible in the harsh light of our entryway. My husband hadn't been in a meeting. While I was fighting for my life, while I was being dragged toward an unknown fate, while I was screaming into the phone for him to save me, Dante Marchetti had been with another woman. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in his arms, letting him comfort me while my mind worked through this new reality. The attack, the betrayal, it was all too much to process. So I did what I'd learned to do over 8 years of being married to a mafia boss. I compartmentalized. I pushed the emotions down into a locked box and focused on survival. That night, as Dante slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I'd survived the attack by sheer luck and the intervention of the Chicago PD, but I couldn't survive on luck forever. Eventually, my proximity to Dante would get me killed, and now I knew something else. Something that changed everything. The man sleeping beside me, the man I'd trusted with my life, would not save me when it mattered most. He'd proven that tonight. Whatever hold he'd once had on my heart, whatever loyalty I'd felt toward him and his world, it had died in that warehouse district while my phone rang unanswered in my hand. The morning after the attack, I woke to find Dante already gone. A note on his pillow said he had urgent business to handle, and that he'd assigned additional security to watch me. As if that mattered now. as if bodyguards could protect me from the real threat in my life, which was the man I'd married. I went through the motions of my morning routine mechanically. Shower, makeup, another expensive suit to replace the one ruined last night. In the mirror, I looked the same. Poised, professional, put-together Harper Marchetti. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I could feel it like a hairline fracture in glass, waiting for the right pressure to shatter completely. At the office, I couldn't concentrate. Every time I tried to focus on a contract or a brief, I saw Dante's face as he'd lied to me. I was in a meeting. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and false. I picked up my phone a dozen times, wanting to call him, to confront him, to demand the truth. But each time I set it down again, because the truth was I wasn't ready to hear it, not yet. Once I knew for certain, once the suspicion became confirmed fact, I'd have to make a decision. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the choice that lay ahead. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to look for proof. 3 days of Dante being unusually attentive, bringing me flowers, taking me to dinner at our favorite restaurant, making love to me with an intensity that felt almost desperate. 3 days of me playing the role of the grateful, shaken wife, who was so thankful her husband was taking care of her. On Friday evening, Dante told me he had a business dinner that would run late. He kissed me goodbye at 6, and I watched from our penthouse window as his car pulled away. Then I did something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. I followed him. I'd borrowed a car from one of my junior associates, telling her mine was in the shop. Dante's men wouldn't recognize it. I kept several cars back as I tailed his black Mercedes through downtown Chicago. My heart was hammering, and my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted him to actually go to a business dinner, to prove my suspicions wrong. But a larger part of me, the part that had felt that perfume on his collar and seen that lipstick on his neck, knew better. He didn't go to any of his usual restaurants or meeting locations. Instead, he drove to the Gold Coast, to a luxury high-rise with a doorman and a fountain in the circular drive. He parked in the underground garage, and I watched from across the street as he emerged, checked his watch, and walked into the building like he owned it. Which, knowing Dante, he probably did. I waited 15 minutes, then walked across the street. The doorman eyed me with professional courtesy, but didn't stop me. I'd dressed carefully for this. Another expensive suit, heels, my hair and makeup perfect. I looked like I belonged there, like I was just another wealthy resident or guest. The elevator directory listed the penthouse as Unit 4201. I pressed the button and rode up in silence, my reflection staring back at me from the mirrored walls. Who was I becoming? The kind of woman who followed her husband, who suspected betrayal around every corner. But then again, I'd never been a naive woman. I'd married into the mafia with my eyes open. Maybe I'd just been blind to the personal betrayals, focused too much on the criminal ones. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. I could hear music playing softly from inside, and voices. Dante's deep rumble, and a woman's laugh, light and carefree, the kind of laugh I hadn't made in years. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open silently and stepped inside. The penthouse was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture in shades of cream and gold. And there, in the living room with a view of the Chicago skyline spread out behind them, was my husband. He had his arms around a woman in a red dress. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair and the kind of curves that made men stupid. She was laughing at something he'd said, her head thrown back, her hand on his chest. And Dante was looking at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the only person in the world that mattered. I stood there in the doorway, and the rational part of my brain cataloged details, the intimate way they stood together, the opened wine bottle on the coffee table, the casual comfort that spoke of this not being the first time they'd been here together, the overnight bag by the sofa that definitely wasn't Dante's style. And then the woman turned, saw me, and screamed. Dante spun around, and I watched the color drain from his face. For a moment, we all just stood there, frozen in a tableau of betrayal. Then Dante moved toward me, his hands raised like he was approaching a dangerous animal. "Harper," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "This isn't what you think." I laughed, actually laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "Really, Dante? That's what you're going with? Because it looks exactly like what I think. It looks like you're here with your mistress in a penthouse you probably bought for her while I was home alone, still recovering from nearly being kidnapped." The woman in the red dress moved then, grabbing her purse. "I should go." "No," I said sharply, and she froze. "You should stay. You should hear this. What's your name?" She glanced at Dante, who gave the barest shake of his head, but she answered anyway. "Scarlet." "Of course it is," I said, and laughed again. "Scarlet, perfect. Tell me, Scarlet, did he tell you he was married? Or was that just a minor detail he forgot to mention?" "Harper, don't do this," Dante warned, his voice taking on an edge. "Scarlet, leave, now." But I was done taking orders. Done being the obedient mafia wife who looked the other way and asked no questions. "Did he tell you that while I was calling him 6 times, begging for help because men were attacking me, he was probably with you? Did he mention that his wife could have died that night while he was too busy with his mistress to answer his phone?" Scarlett's face paled. "What? Dante, is that true?" "It was complicated," Dante started, but I cut him off. "It was Tuesday," I said flatly. "Were you with her on Tuesday night, Dante? Around 9 p.m., when I was fighting off kidnappers in a warehouse district?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Scarlett grabbed her bag and moved toward the door, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered as she passed me. "He said you were separated, that you barely spoke anymore." After she left, Dante and I stood facing each other across the expensive penthouse. "How long?" I asked. 6 months, he admitted after a long pause. "Harper, it didn't mean anything." 6 months. I processed that. Half a year of lies. Half a year of him coming home to me, making love to me, telling me he loved me, all while maintaining another woman in a penthouse across town. And Tuesday, when I called, his jaw tightened. I was with her. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I didn't hear it ring. "You didn't hear it ring 6 times? The music was loud and we were." He trailed off, having the grace to at least look ashamed. "You were what, Dante? Having sex? Enjoying wine and whatever else while your wife was fighting for her life?" My voice was rising now, 8 years of being the controlled, perfect mafia wife finally cracking. "I could have died. Those men could have killed me, or worse, and you would have found out hours later when you finally bothered to check your phone." "But you didn't die," he said. And there was something in his voice now, something cold and calculating, the voice he used for business. "You're fine, Harper. You survived. And this us, we can survive this too. People have affairs. It happens. It doesn't have to mean anything." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. "It means everything, Dante. It means that when I needed you most, you weren't there. It means you've been lying to me for 6 months. It means I can't trust you." "You can trust me," he insisted, moving closer. "With your life, Harper. I would never let anything happen to you." "But you already did," I shouted. "You already did, and you're too selfish to even see it." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Watch yourself, Harper. You're upset, but don't forget who you're talking to." And there it was, the threat beneath the apology, the reminder that Dante Marchetti was not a man who accepted being challenged, especially not by his wife. I'd seen what happened to people who crossed him. I'd signed off on business deals that were covers for money laundering. I'd met with his associates and their wives, all of us playing our roles in the grand theater of organized crime. I pulled my arm free and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Chicago had been my home for over a decade, but suddenly it felt like a prison. A beautiful, luxurious prison where I'd trapped myself by falling in love with the wrong man. "I want a divorce," I said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. In 8 years of marriage, through all the difficulties and dangers, I'd never said those words. We'd had fights before, but this was different. This was an ending. "No," Dante said flatly. "We're not getting divorced. You're upset. You're emotional. Give it time, and you'll see that we can work through this." I turned to face him. "You don't get to decide that. I'm done, Dante. I'm done with the lies. Done with wondering where you are and who you're with. I'm done being your obedient little wife while you do whatever you want." His face hardened. "You think you can just leave? You think you can just walk away from this marriage, from me, from everything you know about my business?" He moved closer, and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "You know too much, Harper. You've sat in on meetings, reviewed contracts, met every member of my organization. You think I'm going to let you walk away with all that knowledge?" The threat in Dante's voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt genuinely afraid of him. Not the abstract fear of his world, the violence that existed at the periphery of our life together, but concrete fear of the man standing in front of me. "Are you threatening me, Dante?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my heart raced. "I'm stating facts," he replied coldly. "You're not just my wife, Harper. You're a liability. You know how the money moves, where the bodies are buried, who reports to whom. You've used your legal expertise to help structure deals that would put half my organization behind bars if the details came out. Do you really think I can let you walk away with all that information?" I'd been naive, foolishly, stupidly naive. I'd thought that being his wife afforded me some protection, that the love we'd once shared meant something. But Dante was a gangster first, a husband second. I'd helped him precisely because I was his wife, using my legal training to make his criminal empire more efficient, more protected. And now that knowledge made me a target. "So what are you saying?" I asked. "That I'm your prisoner now? That I have to stay married to you or else?" "I'm saying that divorce isn't an option," he said, his tone softening slightly, as if he could coax me back into compliance. "Harper, we can fix this. I'll end things with Scarlett. I'll be more attentive. We can go away somewhere, take a vacation, reconnect. But you need to understand that leaving isn't possible. Not for you. Not with what you know." I looked at this man I'd loved for 8 years and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. The charisma that had drawn me in was just manipulation. The protection he'd offered was really control. The life of luxury I'd enjoyed was payment for my silence and complicity. I'd been so busy convincing myself that I could separate Dante the husband from Dante the criminal that I'd failed to see they were the same person. "I need time to think," I said finally. "I can't do this right now. I can't stand here and pretend everything is fine when it's not." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, weighing options, deciding how much leeway to give me. "Fine," he said eventually. "Take your time. But Harper, don't do anything stupid. Don't talk to anyone about this. Not your friends, not your family, certainly not anyone in law enforcement. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I walked out of that penthouse and somehow made it to the car I'd borrowed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove aimlessly for hours, through Chicago's streets, past the lake, through neighborhoods I'd never visited. I was trying to outrun the realization that was crystallizing in my mind with terrible clarity. I couldn't divorce Dante. He'd never allow it. And if I tried to leave anyway, if I ran, he would find me. His organization stretched across multiple states. He had connections in law enforcement, in the courts, in every level of government. I'd helped him build those connections, reviewed the paperwork that made them legal and binding. There was nowhere I could go that he couldn't reach me. Unless. The thought arrived fully formed, audacious and terrifying. There was one place Dante couldn't reach me, one protection even his vast criminal empire couldn't penetrate. Witness protection. But to qualify for that, I'd have to do the unthinkable. I'd have to turn on my husband. I'd have to become what the Mafia called the lowest form of life. A rat. I drove home as dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan, the sky turning from black to gray to pale pink. Dante wasn't there. A text on my phone said he'd stayed at one of his properties downtown, giving me space like I'd asked. How considerate of him. How calculated. I made coffee and sat at our dining room table, looking out at the view I'd once loved. The penthouse had been our first home as a married couple. Dante had carried me over the threshold, and we'd christened every room with the desperate passion of newlyweds. That seemed like a lifetime ago now. A different Harper, married to a different Dante, or maybe just blind to who he really was. My phone buzzed, a message from my law partner Monica, asking if I was coming into the office. I'd completely forgotten it was Monday. I texted back that I was taking a personal day, then shut off my phone. I needed silence. I needed to think. If I went to the FBI, I could tell them everything. 8 years of accumulated knowledge about the Marchetti organization. Financial structures, key players, criminal operations from drug trafficking to money laundering to extortion. I knew it all. I'd helped design some of it. God help me. With my testimony, they could take down not just Dante but his entire network. But the cost would be everything. My identity, my career, my life in Chicago. Everyone I knew. Every relationship I'd built. Gone. I'd have to disappear. Become someone else. Start over somewhere new with nothing but what the federal government deemed necessary for my survival. And I'd have to live with the knowledge that I'd betrayed the man I'd once loved enough to marry. Could I do it? Could I be that person? The answer came surprisingly easily. Yes. Because Dante had already betrayed me in every way that mattered. He'd broken our vows with his infidelity. He'd endangered my life with his negligence. And he'd made it clear that he saw me not as a partner or even a person, but as an asset to be controlled. The Dante I'd fallen in love with, if he'd ever really existed, was long gone. What remained was a criminal who saw his wife as a liability to be managed, but I couldn't just walk into the FBI field office and offer my testimony. Dante had contacts there too. I'd met them at charity events, shaken hands with agents who were on his payroll. If I went through official channels, word would get back to him before I made it out of the building. I needed to be smarter than that. I spent that Monday doing research. Using my laptop's private browser, I investigated FBI procedures for high-value informants. I learned about the Witness Protection Program, officially called WITSEC. I read about other mob wives who'd turned on their husbands, their testimonies that had brought down entire criminal organizations. Some of them had survived. Others hadn't been so lucky. The key, I realized, was having leverage before I made contact. I needed evidence, documented proof that was so valuable the FBI would have no choice but to protect me. Fortunately, I had access to almost everything. As Dante's wife and legal advisor, I had passwords to accounts, keys to safe deposit boxes, knowledge of where the most damaging evidence was kept. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the reconciling wife to perfection. I accepted Dante's apologies. I agreed to give our marriage another chance. I even slept with him, closing my eyes and thinking of survival, of the future I was planning in secret. He was so relieved that I'd come to my senses, so convinced he'd successfully reminded me of my place in his world, that he never suspected what I was really doing. Every time he left for business, I went to work. I copied files from his home office computer. I photographed documents from his safe, memorizing the combination by watching him open it under the pretense of getting jewelry he'd bought me. I accessed encrypted accounts and downloaded financial records. I recorded conversations with his associates when they came to the penthouse, using a recording app on my phone hidden in my purse. I compiled names, dates, amounts. I documented murders. Though I'd never witnessed them directly, I knew who'd ordered them and why. I traced the flow of money from drug sales through legitimate businesses and offshore accounts. I built a case against my husband that would have made any prosecutor weep with joy. And I did it all while smiling at him across the dinner table, while laughing at his jokes, while playing the perfect mafia wife. It was the performance of my lifetime. Dante never suspected. He saw what he wanted to see. A wife who'd been reminded of her place, who understood that leaving wasn't an option, who'd chosen comfort and luxury over principles and freedom. But late at night, when he was asleep beside me, I lay awake cataloging evidence. I had enough now. More than enough. I had the kind of intelligence that could dismantle the entire Marchetti operation and implicate dozens of associated families and corrupt officials. I had the golden ticket to witness protection, the evidence so valuable that the federal government would move heaven and earth to keep me alive to testify. The question was, how to make contact without alerting Dante's sources within law enforcement. I spent hours researching, and finally found my answer in an old law school friend, Marcus Chen, who'd gone into the FBI after graduation. We'd been close once, before I'd married Dante and my life had taken such a different turn. He was based in Washington, D.C. now, working in the organized crime division. More importantly, he was far enough from Chicago's corruption that Dante wouldn't have him in his pocket. I sent Marcus a message through an encrypted email service, brief and to the point. I have information about the Marchetti family. Need to meet somewhere safe. Please help. I signed it with a nickname only he would know, from a case we'd worked together in law school. He responded within hours. Same place we celebrated passing the bar. Tomorrow noon. Come alone. The place was a small cafe in D.C., unremarkable and easily accessible. It would mean lying to Dante about where I was going, but I'd gotten good at lying over the past weeks. I told him I needed to visit my mother in Virginia, that she'd been asking for me since the attack. He'd insisted on sending security with me, but I'd convinced him that armed guards would alarm my mother, who knew nothing about his real business. Eventually, he'd relented, probably thinking I was too afraid to try anything stupid. I flew to D.C. the next morning with nothing but my purse and a small overnight bag. The evidence was all on an encrypted drive hidden inside a hollowed-out lipstick container in my makeup bag. If anyone searched me, they'd find nothing suspicious. Just another wealthy woman traveling to visit family. Marcus was waiting at the cafe when I arrived, looking older than I remembered but with the same sharp intelligence in his eyes. We ordered coffee and moved to a table in the back, away from windows and other customers. "Harper," he said quietly, studying my face. "You look scared." "I am," I admitted. It was a relief to finally tell someone the truth. "Marcus, I need your help. I want to testify against my husband. I want to take down the entire organization. But I need protection. And I need to know that word won't get back to him before I'm safely in custody." He leaned back in his chair, processing this. "You understand what you're asking for? Once you do this, there's no going back. Your life as Harper Marchetti ends. Everything you know, everyone you love, it all goes away." "I know," I said. "But the alternative is staying married to a man who threatened me, who made it clear I'm his prisoner. I'd rather disappear than spend the rest of my life in that cage." Marcus nodded slowly. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" I pulled out the lipstick container and extracted the drive, passing it to him under the table. Everything. Financial records, names, dates, recordings. 8 years of accumulated knowledge about how the Marchetti organization operates. Murder, extortion, drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption of public officials. It's all there." He pocketed the drive, his expression carefully neutral. "I need to verify this. Get it to the right people. If it's as good as you say, we can move fast. But Harper, once we start this process, you're going to have to trust us completely. Can you do that?" I thought about it. About putting my life in the hands of strangers. About giving up everything I'd built over 32 years. Then I thought about Dante's face when he'd threatened me. About Scarlett in her red dress. About dying in a warehouse while my husband's phone rang unanswered. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." Marcus moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 3 days of our meeting in D.C., I received a coded message through the encrypted email service. A single word: verified. The evidence I'd provided was solid enough that the FBI was ready to move forward. Now came the most dangerous part. They wanted me to wear a wire. The meeting was set up in a hotel room in Milwaukee, far enough from Chicago to avoid Dante's network, but close enough that I could make the trip without raising suspicion. I told him I was meeting a potential client about a corporate merger. He barely looked up from his phone when I left, distracted by whatever crisis was currently consuming his attention. His indifference made what I was about to do easier. The FBI team waiting for me consisted of Marcus and 3 others: Special Agent Sarah Brennan, who specialized in organized crime; Technical Agent David Park, who would be outfitting me with recording equipment; and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Wilson, who would be building the case against Dante and his organization. "Mrs. Marchetti," Agent Brennan began, her tone professional but not unkind. "Before we proceed, I need to make sure you understand the risks. What we're asking you to do is extremely dangerous. If your husband or any of his associates discover you're recording them, your life will be in immediate danger. Are you certain you want to do this?" I looked at the 4 of them, these strangers who held my future in their hands. "I'm certain. But I need to know that when this is over, when I've given you what you need, you'll protect me. That I'll actually make it into witness protection." Wilson stepped forward. "You have my word. The evidence you've provided is extraordinary. With your testimony, we can take down not just Marchetti, but at least 30 associated criminals and corrupt officials. You're the most valuable witness we've had in a decade. We will protect you." David began explaining the technical aspects. The device was incredibly small, sewn into the lining of a designer handbag that looked exactly like ones I already owned. It would record audio with crystal clarity and had a battery life of 8 hours. There was a panic button disguised as a lipstick that would alert the FBI if I was in immediate danger, though they warned me that depending on where I was, help might not arrive in time. "The key," Marcus explained, "is to be natural. Don't ask leading questions or try to get him to confess to specific crimes. Just have normal conversations. He'll incriminate himself if you give him space to talk. Men like Dante, they can't help but brag about their power, especially to their wives." Over the next 3 weeks, I recorded everything. Conversations over breakfast about territorial disputes with the Calabrese family. Phone calls I accidentally overheard about shipments coming in from overseas. Dinner parties where Dante and his associates discussed business while their wives pretended not to hear. I captured it all, walking through my life like a ghost, playing a role, waiting for it to end. The night that changed everything came exactly 23 days after I'd started recording. Dante came home late, around 11, his mood dark and volatile. I was in the bedroom, the recording device in my purse on the nightstand, always within reach now. He'd been drinking. I could smell the whiskey on his breath when he came in. "We have a problem," he announced, loosening his tie with jerky, aggressive movements. "Marco thinks there's a leak. Someone's been talking to the feds. They knew about the shipment last week, nearly intercepted it at the port." My heart stopped, but I kept my face carefully neutral. "That's terrible. Do you know who it is?" "Not yet," he said, pouring himself another drink from the bar in our bedroom. "But we'll find them, and when we do..." He left the threat unfinished, but I understood. I'd seen what happened to informants in Dante's world. They didn't just disappear. They were made examples of, their deaths slow and painful warnings to anyone else who might consider betrayal. "I'm sure you'll handle it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You always do." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought he knew. I thought somehow he'd seen through the performance, recognized the stranger his wife had become. But then he crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. "I'm sorry I've been distant," he said, his voice muffled against my hair. "With all this business, with the threats from the Calabrese family, I haven't been the husband you deserve. But I want you to know, Harper, you're the only one I trust. You're the only person in this whole goddamn world who's always on my side." The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. Instead, I held him and murmured reassurances while the device in my purse recorded every word. He trusted me. The man who'd betrayed me, threatened me, imprisoned me in this marriage, trusted me. And I was using that trust to destroy him. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, I lay awake thinking about who I'd become. I'd been raised by parents who valued honesty and integrity. I'd gone to law school believing in justice and the rule of law. Somewhere along the way, I'd compromised those values, convinced myself that loving Dante was enough justification for ignoring his crimes. But you couldn't compartmentalize morality. You couldn't be a good person married to a monster and claim your hands were clean. The recordings continued. I captured Dante discussing the murder of a rival who'd tried to move in on his territory. I recorded him bribing a police captain to look the other way during a shipment. I documented extortion, loan sharking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. Every conversation added to the case against him, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical burden. Marcus had warned me that they'd need at least 6 weeks of recordings to build an airtight case. We were approaching that deadline when Dante announced he was throwing a party at our penthouse. A big one, celebrating some business deal he'd closed. All the major players in his organization would be there, along with several politicians and business leaders who were on his payroll. "It's the perfect opportunity," Marcus told me during a brief meeting in a parking garage. "Everyone in one place, all talking freely because they think they're among friends. If you can record that party, it could give us everything we need to move forward." "And after?" I asked. "After the party, what happens?" "We pull you out," he said. "Within 48 hours of the party, we'll execute arrest warrants for Marchetti and at least 20 others. You'll be taken into protective custody first, relocated before any of them realize what's happening. By the time your husband figures out you betrayed him, you'll already be gone." Gone. The word echoed in my mind as I prepared for the party. I picked out a dress, had my hair done, played the role of the elegant mafia wife one last time. But I was already disappearing, already becoming someone else. Harper Marchetti was dying, and whoever I'd be after this, with a new name and a new city, she'd be born from these ashes. The party was everything Dante wanted it to be. Expensive champagne flowed freely. A string quartet played in one corner while guests mingled and laughed, discussing business deals that were really criminal conspiracies. I moved through the crowd with my purse always nearby, capturing conversations, gathering evidence. I watched Dante work the room, charming politicians and intimidating rivals in equal measure. He was brilliant at it, I had to admit. Charismatic and dangerous, everyone's best friend and worst enemy simultaneously. I'd fallen in love with that confidence once. Now, it just made me sad. What a waste of intelligence and charisma, all devoted to destruction. Late in the evening, I was near the balcony when I overheard a conversation between Dante and Vincent Calabrese, head of the rival family. They thought they were speaking quietly, but the recording device picked up every word. "We need to put aside our differences," Vincent was saying. "This investigation, it's getting too close. If we don't work together, we both go down." "What investigation?" Dante asked, his voice sharp with alarm. "The feds have been asking questions. About our operations. About the money. Someone's been talking, Dante. Someone close enough to both our organizations to know how everything works." I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned away, trying to look casual as I moved back toward the main room, but my mind was racing. They were getting too close to the truth. If they started seriously investigating who might be the informant, how long before they looked at me? I'd been so careful, but I was the obvious choice. I knew everything about both families, had access to all the information the FBI would need. I needed to signal Marcus. We needed to move up the timeline, get me out, before Dante started connecting the dots. But the panic button was only for immediate physical danger, and I couldn't just leave my own party without raising suspicion. I was trapped, surrounded by criminals and corrupt officials, with evidence of their crimes in my purse, and no way to safely communicate with the people who were supposed to protect me. I made it through the rest of the party on autopilot, smiling and making small talk while my mind calculated escape routes and contingencies. When the last guest finally left around 2 a.m, I was exhausted from the performance. Dante was drunk and in a good mood, pleased with how the evening had gone. He pulled me close as we stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "Did you have fun tonight, baby?" "It was a wonderful party," I said, and it wasn't even a lie. In a twisted way, it had been perfect. I'd gotten everything the FBI needed. Now I just needed to survive long enough to give it to them. "I love you," he said, his words slightly slurred. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. You're my queen, Harper. My partner in all this. I couldn't do any of it without you." I looked out at Chicago's glittering lights and wondered if I'd ever see this view again. "I love you too," I said. And in that moment, I wasn't even sure if it was a lie. I loved the man he could have been, the life we might have had if he'd been someone different. But that man and that life had never really existed. They'd been a beautiful illusion, and now it was time to wake up. The morning after the party, I woke to the sound of shouting. Dante was in his office down the hall, his voice raised in anger that penetrated even through the closed doors. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, trying to make out the words. Something had happened. Something bad. I got up and dressed quickly, then made my way to the office. Dante was on the phone, his face red with fury. When he saw me in the doorway, he motioned for me to come in and close the door. I did, noting the way his hand trembled slightly as he gripped the phone. I had never seen him this shaken. "I understand," he was saying, his voice tight and controlled now. "Find out who. I don't care what it takes. Find out who's talking and handle it." He hung up and turned to me. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already suspected. 3 of my warehouses were raided this morning, simultaneous FBI operations. They knew exactly where to look, what they'd find. This wasn't luck, Harper. Someone gave them detailed information about our storage locations. My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to look concerned rather than terrified. "That's horrible. Do you think it's the same leak from before?" "It has to be," he said, running his hand through his hair. "But who? Who knows enough about our operations to give the feds that kind of specific intelligence?" He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Suspicion. Not directed at me, not yet, but present. He was starting to question everyone. Could it be someone in Vincent's organization? I suggested, trying to redirect his attention. "You two were talking last night about the investigation. Maybe it's someone trying to take you both down." He considered this, nodding slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's someone closer." His phone rang again, and he answered it, his eyes never leaving my face as he listened. "Bring him to the warehouse on 5th Street. I'll be there in an hour." He hung up and grabbed his jacket. "I have to go. Don't leave the penthouse today. I'm having Marco station men outside." "Dante, you're scaring me. What's happening?" He stopped at the door, his expression softening slightly. "Nothing for you to worry about, baby. Just stay home today, okay? I need to know you're safe while I deal with this." After he left, I stood in his office, my mind racing. The FBI had moved too soon. They were supposed to wait until they had me safely in custody before making any arrests or raids. Something had gone wrong with the plan, and now Dante was on high alert, looking for the informant. The walls were closing in from both sides. I needed to contact Marcus, but I couldn't use my phone. Dante might have it monitored now. I couldn't use the email service either, not from the penthouse. I was effectively under house arrest, with Dante's men watching the exits. The trap I'd helped design for my husband was beginning to close around me too. Hours passed. I tried to act normal, reviewing case files from my law practice, making lunch. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into panic. Around 3 p.m, the doorbell rang. I answered it to find Marco, Dante's right-hand man, standing there with 2 other guards. "Mrs. Marchetti," Marco said, his tone polite but firm. "Mr. Marchetti asked me to escort you to his location. He wants to see you." "I thought he said to stay here," I said, my heart beginning to race. "Plans changed. Please, get your coat. We need to leave now." I had no choice. I grabbed my coat and the purse with the recording device, though I made sure it was switched off. If Dante had somehow discovered what I'd done, that device would be my death warrant. The guards flanked me as we took the elevator down and got into a black SUV. We drove to the warehouse district, the same area where I'd been attacked weeks ago. My hands were shaking, and I clasped them in my lap to hide it. Marco glanced at me in the rearview mirror but said nothing. The silence in the car was oppressive. The warehouse was one of Dante's legitimate properties, at least on paper. It was supposed to store imported goods, but I knew it also served as a place for less legal activities. We pulled up to a side entrance, and Marco opened my door, gesturing for me to follow him inside. The interior was dimly lit, cavernous and cold. I could hear voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. Marco led me through a maze of storage units until we reached an open area where Dante stood with several of his men. And in the center of the space, tied to a chair with his face bloodied and swollen, was someone I recognized from the party last night. Anthony Russo, one of Dante's captains. "Harper," Dante said, turning as I approached. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry to bring you here, but I thought you should see this. Anthony has been talking to the FBI. He's the leak we've been looking for." I looked at Anthony, at his terrified eyes meeting mine, and I felt sick. He wasn't the informant. I was. But he was going to die for my crimes. "Are you sure?" I managed to ask. "We found the proof," Dante said, gesturing to a table where a phone and some papers were laid out. Encrypted messages to a federal agent. Bank statements showing unexplained deposits. He sold us out for money and a reduced sentence on some old charges they were threatening to bring against him. It was all fabricated, I realized with dawning horror. They'd manufactured evidence to pin the leaks on Anthony. Maybe they really believed it was him, or maybe they just needed someone to blame, someone to make an example of. Either way, Anthony was going to die because of me. "I want you to understand something," Dante said, moving closer to me. "This is what happens to rats in my organization. There's no forgiveness, no second chances. Betrayal is paid for with blood." He pulled out a gun and handed it to me. "I want you to do it." I stared at the weapon in my hand, its weight foreign and terrible. "What? Dante, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "You're my wife, my partner. I need to know that you understand the rules of this world, that you're truly with me. So you're going to execute this traitor, and then we're going to move forward together, stronger than ever." This was a test. I understood that immediately. Whether he truly suspected me or not, He was testing my loyalty, seeing if I could kill to prove I was part of his world. And if I refused, if I showed weakness or hesitation, his suspicion would turn toward me. Anthony was sobbing now, trying to speak through his broken jaw. "Please," he managed to say. "Mrs. Marchetti, please, I didn't do anything. I swear on my children's lives, I'm not the rat." I looked from Anthony to Dante to the gun in my hand. Every choice led to death. If I shot Anthony, I became a murderer, crossed a line I could never come back from. If I refused, I revealed my true loyalties, and Dante would kill us both. And if I tried to run, the guards surrounding us would stop me before I made it 10 feet. "I can't," I said, lowering the gun. "Dante, I'm your wife, not your executioner. I can't just kill someone, even if he did betray you." Dante's expression hardened. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I said, my voice stronger now. "I love you, but this isn't who I am. I won't do this." For a long moment he just stared at me. Then he took the gun from my hand, pressed it against Anthony's temple, and fired. The sound echoed through the warehouse, impossibly loud. Anthony's body slumped in the chair, and I couldn't stop the scream that tore from my throat. Dante grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "Get her out of here," he ordered Marco. "Take her home, and don't let her out of your sight." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. I was in shock, the image of Anthony's execution playing on repeat in my mind. Marco and 2 guards escorted me upstairs and positioned themselves in our living room. I was a prisoner now, in all but name. I went to the bathroom and locked the door, turning on the shower to cover any sound. Then I pulled out my phone and risked sending a message to Marcus through the encrypted service. "Compromised. Need extraction now. He's testing me. Someone died. Please help." I deleted the message thread and hid the phone in a tampon box under the sink, somewhere Dante's men were unlikely to look. Then I sat on the bathroom floor and tried not to fall apart. I'd gotten Anthony killed. He'd died for my betrayal, taking the blame for crimes I'd committed. His blood was on my hands as surely as if I'd pulled the trigger. Hours passed. Dante came home late, smelling of whiskey and gunpowder. He didn't speak to me, just went to his office and closed the door. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Marcus had gotten my message, if help was coming, or if I was going to die in this penthouse, another victim of the world I'd been foolish enough to marry into. The next morning, everything changed. I woke to the sound of helicopters and shouting. I ran to the window and saw FBI agents swarming the building. Dante burst into the bedroom, wild-eyed and desperate. "You," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It was you. All this time, you were the rat." I didn't deny it. There was no point. "Yes," I said simply. He moved toward me, and I saw murder in his eyes. But before he could reach me, the bedroom door crashed open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting for Dante to get on the ground. Marcus was among them, and he moved to stand between me and my husband. "Dante Marchetti, you're under arrest," one of the agents began, reading him his rights as they forced him to his knees and cuffed him. Dante was staring at me the whole time, his expression a mixture of rage and something that might have been hurt. "How long?" he asked. "Since the night you ignored my calls," I said. "Since the moment you chose her over me." They dragged him out, still staring at me over his shoulder. The last thing I saw was the realization on his face that he'd lost everything, destroyed by the woman he'd underestimated and betrayed. The FBI took me to a safe house immediately after Dante's arrest. It was a nondescript building in a suburban neighborhood, the kind of place you'd pass without a second glance. They confiscated my phone, my purse, everything that connected me to my former life. I was given a room with basic furnishings and told to wait while they processed the evidence and prepared for the trials. Marcus visited me that evening, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We got all of them," he told me. Marchetti, his top lieutenants, the Calabrese family, 3 judges, 2 police captains, and a state senator. "Your recordings and testimony have given us the biggest organized crime takedown in Chicago's history. Anthony Russo is dead because of me," I said flatly. "Dante executed him yesterday because he thought Anthony was the informant." Marcus's expression sobered. "I know. I'm sorry, Harper. We moved as quickly as we could, but sometimes in these operations there's collateral damage. Russo wasn't innocent. He was involved in at least 3 murders we know of. But you're right. He didn't deserve to die for something he didn't do." "That makes me feel so much better," I said bitterly. "I'm not trying to make you feel better," he replied. "I'm trying to be honest with you. You did the right thing by coming to us. You're saving lives by taking these people off the streets. But yes, there's a cost. There's always a cost." Over the next few weeks, I lived in limbo. FBI agents and prosecutors came and went, preparing me for testimony, walking me through the evidence, building their cases. I learned that Dante had been denied bail, considered too much of a flight risk and a danger to witnesses, particularly me. They'd found explicit orders he'd given from jail to have me killed. His own wife, the woman he'd claimed to love. The reality of what I'd done began to sink in during those weeks. I'd destroyed not just Dante, but dozens of others. Some were violent criminals who deserved what they got. Others were more peripheral, people who'd gotten caught up in the organization and would now spend years in prison. Wives would lose husbands. Children would grow up without fathers. Businesses would collapse. It was a domino effect of destruction, and I'd pushed the first tile. But when I thought about the alternative, about staying silent and complicit, about the people Dante's organization had hurt and would continue to hurt, I knew I'd made the right choice. It just didn't feel righteous. It felt like survival, messy and complicated and morally gray. The trials began in early spring. I testified for 3 weeks straight, telling my story over and over to different juries. Defense attorneys tried to paint me as a vengeful wife, motivated by anger over infidelity rather than justice. They weren't entirely wrong. My betrayal had started with Dante's, with his choice to ignore my desperate calls while he was with his mistress. But it had become something more than revenge. It had become about reclaiming my agency, my morality, my life. Dante's trial was the hardest. I had to sit on the witness stand and look at him as I detailed his crimes. He stared at me the entire time, with an expression I couldn't read. Hatred, certainly, but also something like bewilderment, as if he still couldn't quite believe I'd done this to him. When the prosecution played the recording of him executing Anthony Russo, I watched the jury's faces shift from skeptical to horrified. That single recording, more than anything else, sealed his fate. The defense tried to argue it was self-defense, that Russo had been dangerous, but you couldn't watch that video and see anything but cold-blooded murder. The guilty verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts: racketeering, murder, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, drug trafficking, witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dante showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He just kept staring at me until the marshals led him away. I testified at 6 more trials over the following months. Each resulted in convictions. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with my insider testimony, was overwhelming. The Marchetti organization was dismantled completely, its assets seized, its members either in prison or on the run. Finally, it was over. The last trial concluded in August, almost a year after I'd first contacted Marcus. The U.S. Marshals Service took over then, preparing me for my new life in witness protection. I met with my handlers in a conference room, going over the details of my disappearance. "You'll be relocated to a small city in the Pacific Northwest," the lead marshal, a woman named Jennifer Torres, explained. We've created a complete identity for you. Birth certificate, social security number, employment history, everything. Your name will be Emily Carson. You'll have a modest apartment and a job lined up at a local law firm, though you'll be working as a paralegal, not an attorney. We can't risk someone recognizing your legal work. Can I ever practice law again? I asked. It hurt to think about giving up my career, the thing I'd worked so hard to build. Maybe eventually, under your new identity, you could take the bar exam again. But not for several years, and not in any major market where someone might recognize your style or expertise. For now, you need to be Emily Carson, an ordinary person living an ordinary life. I was given a small amount of money to start over, enough for a few months of expenses while I got settled. Everything else I'd owned was gone, liquidated or seized as proceeds of crime. The penthouse, the cars, the designer clothes, all of it had been purchased with blood money. I was glad to be rid of it. The last thing I did before disappearing was visit my mother. She'd been kept in the dark about everything for her own protection, told only that I was leaving Dante and needed to get away for a while. The marshals allowed me one supervised visit to say goodbye. She held me as I cried, not understanding why I was leaving or why I couldn't tell her where I was going. "You'll be okay," she whispered. "Whatever happened, whatever you did, you're strong enough to survive it. You're my daughter, and I'm proud of you." I wanted to tell her everything. About the danger I'd been in, about the choice I'd made, about the person I'd become, and the one I hoped to be. But all I could say was, "I love you. I'm sorry. Please know that I had to do this." "I know," she said, though she couldn't have known. "I know, baby. Be safe." Then Emily Carson was born, and Harper Marchetti ceased to exist. My new city was smaller than Chicago, quieter, perched between mountains and ocean. The apartment the Marshalls had arranged was modest but comfortable, a one-bedroom in a building full of other ordinary people living ordinary lives. I started my paralegal job at a local firm that specialized in real estate law, as far from criminal work as I could get. The first few months were the hardest. I was lonely in a way I'd never experienced before. I couldn't contact anyone from my old life. My mother, my friends, my colleagues, they all thought I'd disappeared, either dead or in hiding from Dante's organization. In a way, I had. Harper had died the day she'd walked out of that courtroom for the last time. But Emily slowly came to life. I made small talk with my coworkers. I joined a book club at the local library. I started running along the waterfront in the mornings, something Harper in her designer heels and power suits had never done. I learned to cook, really cook, not just heat up takeout or attend catered dinner parties. I adopted a cat from a shelter and named him Justice, a small private joke that no one else would understand. A year into my new life, I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he was a high school teacher, as far removed from Dante's world as a person could be. We met at a coffee shop when we both reached for the last blueberry muffin. He smiled and offered it to me, and somehow that simple gesture of kindness made me want to cry. We started dating slowly. He knew nothing about my past, believed the cover story the Marshalls had created about me moving here after a difficult divorce. He was kind and patient and normal in ways that felt miraculous after years in Dante's dangerous world. We talked about books and movies and what we'd do when we retired. Simple things, safe things. 2 years after entering witness protection, Daniel proposed. I said yes, even though I knew I could never tell him the whole truth about who I'd been. Emily Carson could marry him and build a life together. Harper Marchetti would remain buried, a ghost that only I remembered. The wedding was small, just a few friends we'd made, and Daniel's family. No one from my past was there because no one from my past could know I existed. But standing there in a simple dress in a small garden venue, promising to love and cherish this good man, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I still think about Chicago sometimes, about the life I had, the woman I was. I read news articles online about the aftermath of the trials, about how the city's crime rate dropped, about the families who found justice because I'd spoken up. The FBI estimated that my testimony had helped solve 17 previously cold murder cases and prevented countless future crimes. But I also think about Anthony Russo, about the price he paid for my choices. I think about Dante, spending the rest of his life in a maximum security prison, and I wonder if he ever understands why I did what I did. I doubt it. Men like him don't understand that there are things more important than power and control. They don't understand that love without respect is just another form of prison. Sometimes I dream about the night I called him 6 times. In the dreams, he answers. He leaves his mistress and comes to save me, and somehow that changes everything. We get a second chance, a different life. But then I wake up and remember the truth. That version of Dante never existed. The man I married was always going to choose himself over me. I was just too in love to see it clearly. Emily's life is smaller than Harper's was, but it's mine. I own it completely, every choice and consequence. I work hard at my paralegal job and come home to my husband and my cat and my small apartment with a view of the mountains. I volunteer at a women's shelter, helping other women escape dangerous situations, though I can never tell them I truly understand what they're going through. I'm building something real and honest, one day at a time. 3 years after my testimony, I received a message through my Marshall handler. It was from Marcus, now promoted to supervisory special agent. The message was brief. Thought you'd want to know. Scarlett testified that Marchetti called her that night, your night. She confirmed he was with her and ignored multiple calls from you. It's in the record now. Everyone knows what he chose. I didn't know how to feel about that. Vindicated? Sad? It didn't change anything, really. But maybe it mattered that the truth was documented somewhere, that history would record not just my betrayal, but his. The last communication I received from anyone connected to my old life came 5 years after I'd entered witness protection. My mother had passed away, and the marshals had debated telling me. They'd decided I deserved to know, even though I couldn't attend the funeral. She'd died believing I was alive somewhere, safe and happy. I hoped that had brought her some comfort. I grieved alone, unable to share my loss with anyone who'd understand. Daniel held me while I cried, thinking I was mourning the end of a relationship that had already been long over. In a way, I was. I was mourning Harper, the daughter who'd disappointed her mother by marrying into the mob, who'd then disappeared without explanation. I was mourning all the conversations we'd never have, all the explanations I could never give. But I was also celebrating what my mother had given me, the strength to leave, the moral compass that had guided me toward justice, even when it cost everything. The knowledge that I was worth more than the role Dante had assigned me. She'd raised me to be more than a mafia wife, even if it had taken me 8 years to remember that. Now, 7 years after I testified against Dante Marchetti, I'm sitting in the office I share with another paralegal at the law firm, looking out at the mountains and thinking about how strange life is. Harper Marchetti is dead. Her life ended in a courtroom with the fall of a gavel, but Emily Carson is alive, and against all odds, happy. Not the glossy, superficial happiness of my old life, but something deeper and more sustainable. I'll never be able to go back to Chicago. I'll never practice law at the level I once did. I'll never see most of the people I once knew or reclaim any part of the life I built before. But I'm free. Truly free, in a way I never was even before I married Dante. Free from his control, from his world, from the complicity that had slowly been eating away at my soul. Sometimes freedom looks like a life sentence. You lose everything familiar and have to rebuild from nothing. But standing on the other side of it now, I can say with certainty that it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every loss, every moment of fear and loneliness. Because the alternative was a different kind of prison, one I'd walked into willingly but would have died in, either literally or spiritually. I testified against my husband and brought down his empire. I became the thing he feared most, the woman who refused to be controlled. And now I'm the thing he never imagined I could be. Happy without him, whole without his world, free in a way he'll never understand from behind his prison walls. That's my revenge. Not his life sentence, though that matters too. My revenge is this life I've built, this quiet joy I've found, this proof that he never owned me completely, no matter how much he thought he did. Harper Marchetti might be gone, but she went down fighting. And Emily Carson rose from those ashes, scarred but surviving, broken but healing, afraid but brave enough to keep going.